of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. What's listed as standard motions and has been crossed out, we're waiting on the minutes for December 16th, 2015. We'll probably defer those to the January meeting. So at this time, we're going to go right to other business, and it involves a work session, mainly involving zoning code amendments and the things dealing with the comprehensive plan and some paperwork and things that have been left for the last approximately year and a half that felt that the City Commission and Zoning Commission felt that needed to be cleaned up and addressed. And so at this time, turn the meeting over to Mr. Walter Hadley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I think might be the best as far as follow-up on all of these items, you've all had an idea or ideas on looking at this list. Before I make some comments on some of the changes that we're thinking initially on making to the zoning code, we are going to wind up doing the Renaissance Zone subdivision ordinance. We're going to review all of those documents. Last night we did finalize the proposals and amendments that you folks considered in late 2014, all but one. And Jason was kind enough to come in and visit with us, and we visited on lot sizes for single-family attached. We'll have a little short discussion right now on that, just to tell you where it is. I think we've decided that we're going to keep the size of the lots per side in the 40-foot range, maybe 45. That would equate to a 90-foot lot. Let's just say we went with the 45. We've had some problems with folks coming in, building duplexes, and then dividing them and not meeting our minimum lot size requirements. And unfortunately, they've actually been recorded, gone through the whole process. People have purchased them, they've been transferred, title company review, all of that, without meeting our standards currently. And that kind of is a problem, in my opinion, for the people that purchase those, because they wind up being non-conforming properties. Additionally, the properties that were split like that wind up being small properties that don't really fit in. I use the States Edition just because it's a very obvious known one. There is a smattering of single-family attached over there, and they fit in quite well in the neighborhood. I think that's our goal, is to make those fit in, not only with single-family because they are the transition, but to make them feel more of a home type environment that's above an apartment or a small condo development. So I think with the 40 to 45 foot lot width, I think we're right in the ballpark. We are going to propose that as part of one of the amendments, and that's a carryover from the 2014 discussions that you folks had. So I'd like to get some comments on that from you folks on the board, or at least think about it between now and next month, so we can start getting some of these items finalized on a draft form, so then we can bring it back to you. The plan is really, if you read through the memo, don't really want to discuss all these items and then come up with a solution today and have a hearing next month. You know, really the items that we discuss, we'd like to have some ideas, come up with a draft, come up with that draft next month on some of the items. The following month we'll come up with a draft on some other items, and continue that forward as we're ready to do that. Now, we will have some other items on the agenda. Next month we did start our new process, which is a little more sequential. There's a little more homework that's necessary up front for people to apply, but actually what we wind up with is a much more finalized application when it comes to you and it comes to our staff. So that's one of the main reasons. We had a couple items that didn't make this agenda because they didn't meet the requirements for the new process. So starting next month, we will have a few items that I know of. I think there's at least two, right, Stephen? One, two, that we know of. We've met with numerous other people, so we're going to have to kind of have this discussion amongst other applications in the future. Today is a great day. Shirley, welcome. It's a great day for her to start because also we're just discussing a new future, where we're going and what we're doing. So maybe any comments on the lot sizes on single-family attached that, I know it's a while ago that you guys were talking about it. Jason's very familiar with it. Any comments that you can take back and put in that amendment from your side?
Okay, Mr. Hadley. Before we get to that, the lot size, I too would like to personally welcome Shirley Dukart to the commission. Yeah, it's a great addition. Thank you very much, Shirley, for taking the chair. Okay. Now we'll go back to the Mr. Hadley's lot sizes. Comments? Direct them to Mr. Hadley.
I met with Walter and Steve and Leonard from the city, and we went over some of those issues that we had talked about at the last meeting, and I think we came up with a solution. I think our code was already written to kind of where we wanted to be, we just needed to fine tune it and put some footnotes to it, and I think it's going to work out pretty well. So.
Did you like that? I mean, I took notes a couple times when we met. Were you leaning more 45 or 50 feet?
Well,
I know you like the.
Well, I think I don't know if we did we set a width?
I don't think we actually set it. We discussed that 35 was a little slim.
Yeah. I think we were wanted to stay in that 3,500 to 4,000 square feet, which kind of would, which would kind of restrict you on width, you know. Yeah. Can't get too small because I don't imagine you'll see a 20 by 200 foot lot if we're 4,000 square feet. So, yeah, I think 35 is probably a little on the small side. I think 40 would be a kind of an ideal number. And I think minimum size 35 to 4,000 is what we kind of had thought. So. In the square footage.
Okay, and how does everybody else feel about the 80-foot lots for single family attached? Does that, you know, I mean, I don't know what the discussions were in late 2014 that led us to this, so that's the one variable that I'm not aware of. And
well, I think where we got in trouble here is the interpretation of it. Okay. Our code is already written, but it says, you look on this as a single family on an R2 lot is 7,000 square feet minimum. A twin home or duplex on a single family lot is 3,500 square feet. But we always assume that you take the 7,000 plus 3,500, where it should be 3,500 and 3,500. I think it was just an interpretation issue. So what had happened, we would start running into trouble with the 7,000 because we assumed that was the minimum lot size, and I don't think that was ever the intention of what we had written there. It was just how some people interpreted it in the past, and that's been going on for years. That's just not like recent. So
does everybody concur with that? I mean, from the group standpoint?
I think if you go over 2 units, then it's 3,000. Am I correct?
So we would stay with the 7,000 square foot and have a 40-foot frontage requirement on each side?
If it was going to be a single family on an R2 lot.
Single family attached?
Yep.
Yep.
Jason?
No, I don't think. The code reads, if you put a single family house on an R2 lot, the minimum lot size is 7,000. Right. You put 2 units on a single, it would be 7,002 also. That'd be the minimum because it'd be 3,500. 3,500 per side. I mean, is that where we want to go?
Yeah, the interpretation has been that you start with a lot that's 7,000 square feet for single family, and then if you wanted to do a duplex, then you added on 3,500 square feet. That's been the interpretation. But this was part of the discussion that we had, was the difference between a duplex and a single family attached home. Where the duplex is meant to be two units in one building, you know, where either rent both of those units, or they could split it through the use of a condo association, but it's still meant to be one building, as opposed to what we've been seeing over the last few years, which is single family attached attached homes. So there's definitely a difference between the two types of structures.
Yeah.
Single-family attached homes are the ones that share a common wall, and then the lot boundary is along that common wall.
Right.
And I think that's where we've run into issues has been when it comes in for a building permit, it's written down as a duplex and then is split. And I think that's where we got into the issue of what's really the minimum lot size for each of those units.
Well, and our interpretation was, to do a duplex, you needed 10,500 minimum, but then we were also telling them if you were splitting them, you needed 7,000 each.
Right.
That was the confusion.
And so where are we suggesting we're headed now?
Well, we need a definition for duplex, first off, and then we need to follow up with, as a building permit comes in for someone to build a duplex, that's what it is. So if the lot lines and lot support the duplex, that's fine, but that's actually what they're building. Now, I understand from the building side, there isn't much difference between how a duplex is built and how your single-family attached from how the building code is interpreted and what we're requiring people to do. But I specifically think that we need to have a definition of duplex, and if someone actually comes in to build a duplex, that's what it is. I mean, that's what we're saying, that's what we're giving entitlement for. If by chance they have the size of lot that they can actually come back and split it, then they can come back in and ask to go through that process. But it would be a process that would go through the city. It wouldn't be something that just gets recorded. And, we don't even know about, because that's part of our problem. The assessor has 5 or 6, didn't he, Jen, of options that, projects that were recorded without us even knowing they were done. And, it does create some problems, because some of those are very non-conforming structures, and they're brand new, and they've been blended on, they've been title company, everybody's done their work on them, but unfortunately it all failed because they're non-conforming structures and they're brand new.
But technically, if we read the code like it was intended, they wouldn't be non-conforming. Because they both have 3,500 square foot lots.
I don't think there's a few that do, and I think there's one that has 8 feet that's ownership in the neighbor's.
And that's probably just a lot split issue, not as much as the lot size issue,
Right.
There was incorrect lot split when it was surveyed or whatever, but
I'm a little bit confused. So what are you two guys saying, that we should be?
So if you build a twin-
10.5?
if you build a twin home, it's 7,000. If you're gonna split it and sell off each side to different owners. That's what our code reads now. We've always interpreted it, because they said, no, but if you're gonna build a single-family house on that same lot, your minimum lot size is 7,000. So, we've always interpreted, you take the 7,000 plus the 3,500, you need 10.5. That's not the intention of the code. It should have been 7,000 for an art, if you're gonna split it too. It's a smaller lot. So I don't know that there's a lot of those splits that if you apply it correctly, that there may be 1 or 2 that are really non-conforming. I mean, we've got lots over in Fisher's East Side that are 1,200 square foot duplexes on 15,000 square foot lots. And if we apply 7,000 per side, they don't conform.
Because of how they're located on the lot.
Well, because one lot's got 15-foot setback because of a corner, and it's got an easement on the other side, so you got to slide it around to get it on there. So pretty soon it doesn't fit even on there. Well, one side's 9,000 and one side's 6,500 or something like that, so.
And it's true, we have to keep the definition of a duplex, condo, twin home, apartment. They all have to be defined separately, and lot sizes are separate from the definition of the structure itself. If you define a duplex, and I'll address this to Mr. Kubas, if you define a duplex, there are certain things that it will define it, the structure itself will define what it is. A duplex is a one building separated by a certain type of a wall and otherwise no shared features. Or whatever you could go on, but that is a very clear definition. And a structure of that nature can only go on a certain size lot, or minimum size lot. So we want to define all those separately.
And I'm not sure I got my arms around this yet, but when you say 7,000 feet, you know, for somebody that doesn't build houses, that sounds like, you know, not a very big lot for a single-family home. And then when I hear duplex going on 7,000 feet, I start scratching my head a little bit, saying, is this really big enough? But I don't know.
See, the issue with duplex is the wording of it. Duplex, twin home, single family attached, everybody condo, I mean, everybody kind of lumps them all into one thing. I mean, our building code, or the UBC code, doesn't allow really for a duplex in North Dakota. To me, a duplex is like one building that has 2 units in it you can either rent or, you know, the land's owned by one ownership. A single family attached is a condo, what we call a condo, where you own your side and your land and I own my side and my land in a duplex. There's a difference.
Okay, but either way, is 7,000 feet enough for either of those?
I mean, that's been our code forever. We've just interpreted it different. I mean, most people that are buying a twin home, a half, don't really want a big lot,
Sure.
you know.
But it's big enough to get a garage on and...
Yeah, oh yeah. That's where we're talking about the minimum frontage of like 40 feet. So you'd have to have at least an 80-foot lot. So if you have a 24-foot garage, you still have a spot for one car on the street in front of each unit. You know, I think that's where the 40-foot kind of came into play there. In our building code, if somebody came in to build a duplex, you have to build it like a single-family attached. It's got to have the firewall and everything. So really, we don't really even allow in building code for a true duplex. I mean, it's got to be built like a single-family attached. So if you're going to do that, you might as well set it up so you can split it. Why wouldn't you, in case you ever wanted to sell one down the road?
Yeah.
So,
Well, you know, my feeling is if you two guys worked on it and are satisfied, I think I would defer to you.
I think the biggest issue with it is that it's been interpreted different ways. There's been different ideas out there. I think we just need to pick one
yeah.
and say that's what we're doing and go down the road with that.
And our code also says if it's more than 2 units, then the lot size can be 3,000 square feet per unit. So if you take those townhouses that Rose has over there on Dakota Boulevard, those units, those lots are about 4,000 square feet. Those 3 and 4 plexes. You know, those 2-story ones they have over there, they're about 4,000 square feet. I mean, for people looking for affordable, I mean, that's probably, I mean, they don't look out of line or any out of place there. I mean, so, and you know, and some of those I think are only 25 feet wide or 26 feet wide or something like that. So, you know, so you're even less than what we're talking about on a duplex or single family attached.
I think it's good to hear that because if, like, coming from you, that if it's affordable and they're functional, they don't look out of line, that's fine. That should be acceptable if we can define it.
Yeah.
And
Do the numbers you guys are talking about handle those easement issues? I can understand where that would be a...
I mean, most of the time, yeah, I don't see a problem. I think going forward, if we have a clear definition, if anybody's going to plat something where they plan for twin homes, they're going to make sure that it fits in there. Right now, our code's all over the place. I mean, we have different interpretations of what, some say it's 10.5, some say it's 14,000, some say it's, you know, you just don't really, it's not really defined. So if somebody's bringing in a plat that's got a bunch of 4,000 square foot lots that they want duplexes on, obviously that's not going to work in the, you know, but if they got a plan where it works on a 7,000 square foot lot, at least it's an option. And we still talking about maybe going to minimum of 4,000 square feet, or were we going to change it, or were we going to just kind of add in a width minimum?
I think where we left that meeting was to reinterpret what we have,
Yeah.
but that doesn't solve the frontage issue. Or up that to 4,000, where I think were the 2 options that we left that.
Well, I remember we were between 35 feet and 40 feet for frontage. And
Right. I think 40 is a better option myself, just because I think it does give you the ability to have a little bit of flexibility and it winds up fitting in better, I don't think it's going to create a hardship on planning lots.
Yeah, because if you have a 24-foot garage, at least that gives you a little leeway for at least one car on the street or something in front of your unit.
Do these numbers we're talking about, should they be affected by the parking consideration? You know, it seems like that's one of the issues with these kinds of units so often, is that the street is so full of vehicles that you can hardly drive by. Is that a consideration as we're setting these numbers?
Well, I think where we run into that more is on the 3 and 4-plex ones, you know, where you have multiple tenants.
Yeah, it could be.
You don't see it so much on the twin, or the, you know, the twin homes or whatever you want to call them.
I've often wondered if they were set back more, so there was more driveway,
You know, that's,
if that wouldn't help those parking.
It's actually the use of the garage too. I mean, you know, we count
Yeah,
that
I
as parking,
understand.
and unfortunately,
Yeah.
90% of the garages are used.
I think
for parking.
haven't we kind of remedied that? Didn't we make a minimum garage size now?
Gene, didn't we do that? Do you remember that? The minimum,
Yeah,
we talked extensively about them, using the garages for storage.
right.
And I think we increased the minimum garage
Yep,
size.
Yep, I remember that.
Well, it's because most of the garages built on some of those units, I mean, are small, like 20 by 22 or something like that. I thought we went to 24 by 24 was the minimum double-stall garage, I thought, but I could be wrong. So, I mean, that'll remedy some of the parking issues, because you actually have a garage you can get a pickup in or something. Where,
Mr. Chairman, can I add something to this? I think it should be a minimum of 40, because we are having issues with parking. I know the developers like to put as many lots as they can in because it increases the value. But parking, number one, like Gene said, is an issue in Sundance Coves, because now you only have parking on one side of the street. And then also, the townhouses over on First Street West, where they put their garages, just trying to get out of the garages, because there's one on each side, east side, west side. When we show those properties or sell them, the first thing the buyers are saying is, what happens if you run into your neighbor? I mean, I don't know who designed those and how they got approved, but that is an issue when your lot sizes are too small. And like Jason said, if you have to move the building around to avoid the easements, I can't see 35 feet being enough. I really can't.
Thank you.
Jason, if 4,000 or 40 feet wide, 3,500 minimum square foot lots were the standard, what size of duplex or single-family attached homes would you typically build on a 7,000 foot total, 3,500 foot split lot?
I don't know that we're seeing a lot. Where we're running into problems is the bigger lots. What we're running into the problem is the minimum of 7,000 that we've been enforcing now. I don't know that we're building a lot of duplexes that are really small. Like I said, the only ones I know of that are on 4,000 square foot lots are those ones along Dakota Boulevard. You know, those lots are anywhere from 4 to 4,200, I think. But their frontage is small. I think their frontage is only 30 feet.
And typical to these would be a small or standard size double garage.
Yeah.
Is double garages, that is our standard? Single garages aren't allowed?
I think you can still build single garages.
You can have them. You just didn't need to have off-street parking.
We shouldn't, probably.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any code anywhere that says we can't build a single garage anymore.
Well, we've set a minimum now for a double garage, but if we still allow a single, I don't know if we've...
But, I mean, we're allowing singles at apartments.
Would it be really unreasonable to ask for a 40-foot setback or something that you could get 2 vehicles in a driveway? Would that be really unreasonable?
It's just gonna make the lots bigger again. I mean, you might as well make them wider. It's gonna be the same difference.
I'm thinking about the examples you're giving. I don't know important backyards are to lots like that.
I guess it's the intention of what they're building. I mean, the ones I build, my lots are all way bigger than that, but, I mean, I just know like the small ones that the brews build are 1,200 square foot. The buildings are 80 feet wide, and they have a 24-foot garage in each one of them. So then, in that situation, you need at least 100, 12, you need 96-foot wide lot. That'd be the minimum for that one.
So what we need to do is we need to check to see if there is, we don't have a restriction, what they could put on a single-car garage on there, and they could have parking in the driveway for 1 or 2 vehicles, and they'd meet required standards, if that's what we want to continue on with. Or they could build a double garage on that particular lot, if they
Yeah,
wanted.
those are doubles, I mean,
Yeah.
so.
So if that's something that, want to make specific that's in the code, that's possible for the builder to do that.
Just, to me, I have a hard time wrapping my head around that if we were only going to allow 40-foot lots on a twin home, but we'll allow 30-foot lots on a fourplex. Why is that? If they're stacked side, but our townhouses are stacked, why is that? Why should we be different? Why is that okay for a fourplex but not a duplex?
Yeah. That is, when we talked about that a year and a half, 2 years ago about, okay, we're going to call it, can we have a duplex that's up and down, or
Yeah.
this way or that way, or fourplex? It was discussed about the shape of it, the design of it, whether it went up and down or sideways. And
I think that duplex attached single family, the reason it would be a little different, in my opinion, would be it fits in and it's a good transition with the single family neighborhoods. It is a good transition, whereas when you get above that, they're not necessarily a good neighbor to single family.
But we have, on
They don't fit in as well.
Dakota Boulevard, we have them transitioning right from that to R1. And they fit fine. I mean, they're nice looking units.
Behind them, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I'm thinking
Yeah,
adjacent.
that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you're saying I gotta have an 80-foot minimum lot for a twin home, but I can have a 120-foot minimum lot on fourplex.
Is that what we're saying?
Well, that's big. I mean, that's what, it's only 3,000 square feet per lot on a fourplex. A 40-unit townhouse, and look, you can go up to 10. They can be 10 stacked in a row, according to our code.
I would just have one other comment, and we talked about this last time we talked about lot sizes, again, on, an engineering issue on drainage. Jason, what you just said about a standard, maybe 1,200 square foot, each unit's 1,200 square foot, you have a 24 by 24 garage with a minimum setback on the front of a 20-foot driveway, 24 feet wide as the garage, pretty standard stuff. That's already two-thirds impervious, which I don't know in our engineering side of the code if we explicitly call out the impervious limit for multifamily or anything above R1. R1's 50%. So here we've already, a lot of times we interchangeably treat R1 and R2, but we've already exceeded it by quite a bit on the impervious, just for a pretty standard, I think, what would be a standard unit. It's not detrimental if we go into it with our eyes wide open and say, hey, this is going to be R2, we're going to allow up to, maybe it's, that's a bare minimum. If you had some walkways and a patio, 75% impervious would be pretty easy on each lot, I think. As long as we know that going into it, we account for it in our drainage calculations, and we have the accommodations off that lot then to handle the stormwater. It's just something that whatever we decide, we'll work on the engineering side of the code a little bit to accommodate.
And there's certain numbers that you have to adhere to. I mean, you can't go below a certain percentage impervious, no matter.
Well, we wouldn't want to go
Three.
above a certain number, but for certain
Right,
zonings.
above, I mean.
For commercial and industrial, I think we allow upwards 90%. So as long as you know it going into the design of the subdivision, you say, we're going to have more runoff and we need to account for it off-site in a pond.
Just to clarify, in R2, the maximum impervious surface is 65%, and for
Okay.
R3, it's 70%. So that includes everything. That's the building itself, that's the driveway, that's any area that's covered by sidewalks and whatever on site.
I would think just to have some flexibility in building and doing your landscaping, if we're talking 3,500, we probably want to be at 75%.
Sorry, R3 is 75% impervious. R2 is 65%.
Yeah, and I think you'd be pretty limited at 65% with a 3,500 square foot lot. And it's not an issue, it's just something we need to understand on the engineering side, that we can revise our codes accordingly.
But I think one of the biggest issues is we need to project what kind of lots we want to be built and what kind of lots are desired to be built and what kind of units we're envisioning on those, because we're kind of working backwards too. We're trying to look at what we have and massage that and make it work better than how it has. In some cases, Jason's built on larger lots and bigger units, so it really isn't an issue, but we do have some that don't work so well. So I think that's, this discussion, that's why it's difficult, because we're looking at something that we not necessarily have a bullseye on it, saying this is what we're trying to target. I think we need to decide a direction of what we think is important and what we want in the community for those lot sizes. That makes sense financially, obviously, to build, but also where the line is.
And the builders have to know ahead of time what exactly they can build on there. And in coming back to that impervious, if an R2 is 65% impervious, is that a standard set by the state, federal government, EPA, runoff standards for?
No, not that I know.
Where does that come from?
It's just our municipal code. I'm sure it was.
It's arbitrary?
I don't want to say it's necessarily arbitrary. It's not just a runoff thing. It's also the look and feel of your neighborhood too. To have it all concrete and rooftop probably isn't the feel most people would want in their single-family neighborhoods. So to set that limit, we look at it from a drainage perspective, but I think it's also just a green space and a look and feel of your neighborhood too.
Okay.
I don't want to say it's completely arbitrary. I'm sure there's been a lot of study across the country in planning and engineering documents. It's what we've adopted in our code. I'm sure it's fairly consistent with other communities. I don't think anything we're doing is completely out of line. But from the standpoint that we can change it, I guess it could be considered arbitrary, because we can account for it on site and say we want some green space on site, or we can account for it off site, say we're going to generate more runoff and we'll handle it in a larger pond. So I think we have flexibility with that number. As long as we don't change a code and there's an existing subdivision out there that says, well, we had this small pond and now we've allowed twice as much runoff because of a code change, that could get us into an issue. I think going from a 65 to a 75% allowable impervious, I don't think that'll get us in any grave danger on an existing platted R2 neighborhood that is yet to be developed. So,
that may be so. I just wanted to add to something else that Mr. Kubis said, which is the expectations of the folks who move in there, to see, and perhaps one of the reasons they like that was because they had a third of their lot and all their neighbors' lots were green space, and then you bring new construction in and suddenly it's more. So I believe when people move into certain subdivisions and certain zoning districts, they have certain expectations not just what their lots are gonna look like, but also what the surrounding lots are gonna look like too, and the feel of the neighborhood. So I would have a little caution with first with that impervious, that impervious surface, percentage.
I don't think we can plan for every situation. If you take those ones on Dakota Boulevard, the interior units have 6 feet of green space in the front, 6 by 20. Because they have a 24-foot garage, and they're on a 30-foot lot. The outside ones have more, because they, you got your setbacks, and so those inside units, those are 4,000 square foot lots. And they're 2 stories, so I'm sure they're not even close to 65% impervious, if you count the backyard all the way to the end. But in the front, they're probably like 90% impervious.
So that's something we need to clean up, and it has to be defined. I mean, it has to be defined in the code. It can't just be left wide open.
Well, what are we gonna say then? We're not gonna allow them to build like that? I mean, those are affordable housing. There's gotta be, like I said, this whole thing came up more when we had big lots, and this, where you ran into easements or setbacks with the corners, and you couldn't get them to fit on 7,000 square feet. I don't think the intention was to ever say we want to be at 3,500 square feet. I mean, I think that's what our code is, but we ran into a bunch of problems on lots where they were 15,000 square feet, and by the time you split them, took the easements out, one lot would be 5,500 or 5,800 square feet, and one would be 10,000 or almost 10,000. And then that one would be non-conforming because we would always say it was 7,000 minimum. And so in the past, Ed would, on a case-by-case basis, approve it or not if it made sense. I think we were trying to clean that up so you don't run into that issue anymore, because I don't know if you can, I don't know what kind of flexibility you can have, but every project is a case-by-case basis. I mean, I don't think you'd want to tell the developer like Rose or another developer that wants to build townhouses that are going to be affordable housing that our minimum lot size is 40 feet and those units don't no longer, or 40 feet wide is our minimum frontage on those, and now those units you can't build them. I mean, they don't make any sense anymore.
Just how they were saying. Just how they were saying in the State of the City yesterday about how they want to bring more young professionals to Dickinson. So I actually have a couple sets of friends that live there on Dakota Boulevard. They went to school at UND, NDSU, and some other states, and then eventually come back. So whenever they wanted to come back home to North Dakota, and they didn't necessarily want a lawn. They like to travel and do other things, so their lawn is kind of more of a pain than a pleasure in that sense. And also, it is a good buffer for 94 business there between the Roars apartments, then the R1s that are on the other side to the east of it. And it was a really good starter home for them, because when they came at the time, they were looking for a new house. There really wasn't anything that they could afford otherwise, so they were living with their parents. And then now that they purchased that house, they have good credit and they have equity in that house. They're looking for somewhere bigger to live because they're having a family and they're going to stick around here. So, I mean, pretty much everything Jason said, it's like some of my best friends live that life. Those are the young people that are here. Back when they couldn't afford to rent, I mean, rather than make someone else rich, they're making themselves rich now by, owning a house and had some equity in that. So I absolutely agree with everything that he said, and it's not just a matter of raw numbers, it's the people that it affects and the people that stay here and what they want the state of the city to look like. Also, what Craig said about the impervious surface is probably getting close to that percentage, but I know that at their house, they park 2 cars in the garage, and then whenever we have friends come over, there could be 4 others because the lot is deeper. So there's the ability to have 6 vehicles parked on their property, and none are parked in the street. So it's got a lot of space there, and those are really good to look at, I think. I mean, I've always enjoyed them, and those are nice houses over there. So I really agree with Jason and what he's saying.
I absolutely think we need to have a place for units like that over in Dakota. I'm just having a hard time getting my arms around the dimensions and all. It's hard for me to appreciate, what you guys are living with every day and know what the right dimension is. I think that's probably why we said Jason and Walt should get together,
Uh,
figure it out.
I too, like, if I was in the market for a small place that I didn't want to maintain and had low maintenance, but it was comfortable for one or two people, for the builders to come up with the designs and to say, this is good dimension, I think that's great. And I also think for future problems down the road, I think we have to keep a definition of impervious, what we are going to allow. If we don't set those standards, it's one of those things that down the road, that are we going to change that? Do we want to go to, maybe we want to go to 75% instead of 65?
I think Stephen clarified that it is set in code, and if we make some adjustments in lot sizes, and minimum garage sizes, and all those things contribute to it, we just need to be cognizant of it. I don't think it needs to guide your decision on the minimum lot size. It's more staff's recognition of any changes we might make to that lot size. I honestly, from a functionality standpoint, I think the parking issue is probably a bigger issue than the drainage. We can account for that. We can do things, but like Adam said, when you have those higher density units and you can get 4 vehicles parking off street, that's really good. That maintains a nice feel on the street, and it just helps us out on the maintenance side for the streets when we do get some snow in the winter, for places to move that snow, when the vehicles don't have to be on the drive, or on the street side. So.
And on some of those units, some of those PUDs, well, it wasn't the total impervious a part of that. It didn't have to be specifically on each lot, but the total amount for the PUDs, it was like, that could be adjusted to, say, we have enough here. It's like buying carbon credits. You had enough on the whole project to meet the standard.
I think that was the idea, was that, you could, that overall in the planned unit development, you had enough area for, to accommodate drainage and retention.
And usually with the planned unit development, you wind up with clustering of some of that high-density stuff, and then you wind up with more open space in other areas to make up for that. Sundance is kind of a good example, I guess, in that way, and that it has open space that is also drainage features and public areas out there. The multifamily that we're talking about that Adam was mentioning, I think it works out well too. I don't think there's any on-street parking on their side of the street, is there?
There's not enough.
Yeah, I don't think there is. So I mean, it pretty much forces you to have adequate parking for your units there.
What is our front yard setback in R2?
25.
25? So it must be greater than the minimum over there. If you can get,
Probably what?
if you can get 2 vehicles,
Probably 30,
so that was probably by design.
35? Are they 25 up there, though? Yeah.
Both R1 and R2.
No, I meant on those particular units.
Oh, that I'm not aware of. I'll look it up.
Well, it must be more than that if they're getting 2 vehicles.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Way down there.
They're fairly long driveways.
The dimensions you guys have been throwing around, I can't find fault with it. I think you guys are at a point that you're just trying to pick the number, and I think you should do it. And it sounds like the clarity is maybe as important as what the number is, the interpretation issues that we have.
I almost think that we need to look at that whole little section and have it maybe reworded and clearly defined. Jen's very good at that. She'll work with us and make sure that, we have it clearly defined. And if you are on board with a 40-foot, 80-foot lot, maybe that's what we should do for this particular item, is just go away and come back with something that's a little more clear of a draft for that portion of the code, and then we can talk about it. Give you time to think about it a little bit too, because I don't think we're going to solve this totally this morning. And we have a few other things to talk about. Any other comments on those sizes? No? On the zoning code amendments on number 1, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. We've got some issues in the sign code. Stephen, I don't know if you want to mention any things that you're thinking of. We do have some cleanup measures in the sign ordinance, some cleanup measures in the actual zoning code itself, just for interpretation. Don't really want to rattle through all of those. Those are basically just to make it a little more clear for our side and also for the public. We have a unified development ordinance, which is a good ordinance, but it just needs to, it's a canned ordinance, you have to understand. It's an ordinance that is used throughout the United States, and you tweak it, if you will, for where you are, and what your feelings are, and what your goals are for your community, what you'd like to see. So I think that's where we are with this, is we just need to look at it and maybe amend it in certain places. We had a sign issue that came up for a new bank in town. And Steve and I debated on we have a code that is pretty clear on what they need to do, but I'm unclear that it actually does what we think it's supposed to do. So it might be a requirement we have that really doesn't benefit us as a community, or benefit the property owner, or benefit the community as a whole. So those types of things, we've identified a few of those. We'd like to just bring those forward to you in a list and just discuss them briefly. I don't think they're not earth-shattering, big policy-type changes, but they would be changes to our code. Interpretation, we need a definition of the duplex, obviously. Jason doesn't necessarily agree with me, and that's fine. That isn't a hot item right now. I just think we need a definition for the opportunity down the road, in case someone wants to do those. It's not a hot item in Dickinson right now, but I just think that if someone comes in with a building permit and they actually want to build a duplex, I think we should have a place for that.
One of the things,
and right now we don't.
One of the things I wanted to add too is every once in a while we come along some situation where someone is requesting a variance from something in the code, and you look at the code and it's like, okay, well, why does this apply in this case? And we found a couple of times where people have requested variances to something like, say, for example, I think it was mini storage, where they're required to do against any property, they're required to have a landscape buffer, which in something like limited industrial doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's some cleanup things. There's some cleanup things where just the language doesn't fit, and then there's some situations where we have restrictions where what are you protecting? Through is why are you going to make the developer do this? So that's mostly what the cleanup that I've been looking at, or if there have been things that have been interpreted. Rather than have an interpretation, just make it clear. Just make it clear in the code.
Thanks, Stephen. I'd like to jump to number 2, if everyone's okay with that, on the subdivision code. I have a list of just four items right now. Craig and I have met throughout the time that I've been here and taken comments from folks, and we have you see in your packet with the minutes, you've got some follow-up for our special use permits, PUDs, subdivisions, what have you. It's the first of its kind for the city. We are going to take it serious as far as following up on the conditions of approval. I think it has come up a number of times since I've been here. We have 25 conditions on our application. Who and when and how is that going to be followed up? Well, it has been. From 2012, we're a little sketchy from 2012, but from, say, 2013 forward, where we have records, we have a pretty good indication of where people are, what conditions, what they're doing, and what they're not doing. And this will be a list that is never finalized. You know, I mean, today, you have a copy of it, it might change next week. But it's going to be a work in progress, and every year, we will make sure at the end of the year that we add the new applications that you folks approve and review them as well, and make sure that they're listed there and that they're following the conditions of approval. We also have been working with, I don't want to talk about it forever, but with development agreements that have been done. Craig's been very helpful, Jen's been working with me on that. We've got a pretty good handle on the development agreements that we have, where we are with them, and we're tightening up, I think, the closure of a lot of those, and the new ones that come through, I think, will be much easier for all of us to track than they have been. And part of it is, and it's not a criticism, part of it is, you know, believe me, I understand. I started up north in the midst of chaos and didn't have a building or planning department at all, and started one from nothing. You guys were overrun as well, and there wasn't the time or process in place to actually follow up with this to the level that I think you desire. I know Gene's mentioned it a number of times, that, you know, and I think all of you have probably mentioned it and thought that, okay, yes, is it time that we actually follow through? Are we following through? I can tell you we are doing that now. So if you do have any questions on those, you know, on the subdivision ordinance itself, we do have a bonding requirement, and, you know, in our ordinance, I'd like to up that to 150% of an engineer or architect's estimate. And I'd also like it to include that, you know, if it's in my discretion or the city engineer, the building official, if it's a building project that he feels that there's a bond necessary for some of the improvements, that would trigger. And I do have an example that we've used elsewhere that we could utilize for that. And it really would help some of the issues that we have, and jump in, both of you. If we had
This is
a
a
bond.
bond for infrastructure?
Infrastructure, public type improvements or conditioned improvements that may or may not have happened. And we have some developments that have some items that haven't been built, haven't been done correctly, and we don't have a bond for them. And then we have homeowners or property owners that complain, which rightly so, but unfortunately, you know, unless the developer is still around, pretty tough for us to enforce. So if we had a bond.
You know, I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay, go ahead.
We've had the bonding requirement in a number of DAs and I think some other places, and I don't think we've ever gotten a bond.
We have a couple, right, Jen? Two?
One and one partial one.
Yeah. I don't know, Craig and I have talked about this a lot, and I used to talk to Ed a lot. I think we're doing something unnecessary here. I think we need to go back to a contractor getting bonds for his work, whether he works for the city or a developer. They're used to getting bonds. It's just standard procedure for a contractor doing municipal work. It's, you know, like rolling off a log, and that contractor gets his bonds, and that's what we rely on. I think that the agreements are so hard to put together to get a developer to get a bond to cover infrastructure. I don't know why we're not just having the contractors do it. And you know, at risk of looking back, we did this back during the last boom. All the work was done by developers, but they were forced to get a bond and provide it to the city, performance and payment bonds.
I think it's critical the city be named as a beneficiary.
Sure,
Because if
can
they
do
walk
that.
away, yeah, if they walk away, then we have the ability to improve that, those improvements that they may or may not be motivated to do anymore. We did use that up north quite extensively, and I'm sure they're cashing in some bonds right now for man camps.
No.
All of the older man camps, or newer man camps, excuse me, that came in, we had them place 150% bond for reclamation. So it would cover the cost of cleaning up the entire site and bringing it back and seeding it and leaving it the way it was. I'm sure there's a number of those that are being cashed in right now because some of those are not there anymore, or they should be. Very similar. I mean, not so much that we have that issue here, but we have some other issues that some of the developments that you see on there did have bonding requirements. They just didn't have bonds that we obtained. And, you know, I think, Jan, I don't know if you want to talk about that. Is there the ability to go back to them? I think we had a little bit of a conversation. I don't know that we ever finished it, but if there's the ability for us to go back to them now.
I don't know that it's a certainty, and it would definitely be on a case-by-case basis if we would be able to do it, but I think it's better to go into it making that bond be there with the agreement. And I know we can have the contractor get them instead of the developer. The only difficulty, I think, is what happens if the developer doesn't hire that contractor. Are we then going to say, okay, that portion just doesn't get done because we don't have a bond on it?
Well, the city does have to be more involved in the process, and I think in the last couple of years, we've been becoming far more involved in the process. I think this hands-off thing, letting a developer just go do water and sewer is, I'm not against the developer hiring the contractor and doing that, but I think the city's got to have some more involvement for its own protection.
How long will these bonds be? I mean, forever?
No.
When it's completed, whatever they were bonding for, when it was completed.
Well, I
They cover
understand
the
that.
warranty period, Jason. That's all. That's all contractors.
So 2 years then?
Well, depending what we ask for a warranty period, it's usually 1 year.
I thought it was 2 years.
Yeah, standard is 1 year.
Probably. It's probably 2 years total, the year of construction, because that bond goes in force, it should go in force, you know, before the construction starts, so it's the year of construction and then the year of warranty. So the total probably is 2 years, but 1 year of warranty passed, you know, after acceptance of the installation.
There was a time when things were so fast and furious that we did talk about asking for a 2-year warranty period. We did never do that.
Oh, that's what I remember hearing, I guess. I mean, as a small developer, I'm not opposed to the contractor getting some kind of performance bond. I mean,
The bonds
as for
aren't-
the developer, I mean, I don't know. It's easier for the contractors, they bond all the time. The developers,
That's right.
the developers literally don't, or technically never bond very often. I mean,
The bonds are not a panacea either. You know, to collect on a bond is not necessarily easy,
no.
but at least you have the tie. Now, there may be a development that needs a bond from the developer for some other reason. Maybe, you know, we've always handled the requirements to a developer with the hammer of the building permits, saying you're not going to get a building permit until you get the streets paved, until you get whatever the item is. And I think we can do that. But there could be some extenuating circumstance with a park or maybe a drainage facility or something that maybe we need a bond from a developer. But for water, sewer, streets, street lights, I just think the easy way to do it is have a process in place where we're involved enough with the bidding process that we've got that performance and payment bond.
And you're looking at that code to be written so you could, the process would be in place so you could, if it was bonding, you would get that from either the developer or the contractor, whichever was the best interest of the city.
Right, and it would also open it up to allow Craig to require a bond outside of, say, our planning review on a different project that he might be involved with. It would allow Leonard to also do one. And it would be case by case, obviously. It wouldn't be, it'd be if there was a reason for them to do it, and it doesn't necessarily come up all the time, but it is good to have that broad definition, just because if it does arise, and it does give us the ability to have that umbrella if you will, that we can stand under and say, hey, we can do that. Big companies, and the definition, would have to be worked on. There's actually funds in lieu of a bond if you have sufficient capital out there that you can actually just provide a funds deposit with the city named a beneficiary that they can access. I've done that too with, when you work with ExxonMobil or somebody that has more money than sense. They can just give you a check, deposit it in an account, and you have access to that if they don't perform I don't see us doing that a whole lot, but, that's another option that we could do. Mainly the question on that is, right now we say 130%. I'd like to bump that to 150, because 150 is kind of a typical that I've been used to throughout the years in different places I've worked. 150% of what the cost, an engineer's or architect's estimate that we agree upon. So, what it would be is if a development came in and had an engineer's estimate, I'd hand it to Craig. Craig would look at it and go, yeah, that seems reasonable. That works. As long as Craig would be agreeable to it, and Jen was good with the format that the bond was in, then that could move forward. So basically, it would be a change from 130 to 150. And it would also include, the amendment would include adding myself, the city engineer, and the building official. I don't know if there's anybody else that we'd want to add on there, but to that list. And not saying that we utilize it a whole lot, but it would give us the opportunity to do that. No more comments on that?
Well,
Yes?
the 150%, if we do go the direction of a contractor's bond, you might want to check into that, see if that's a problem for a contractor. I don't know that that's necessary. We're bonding to hopefully guarantee the street or the water and sewer. And if you've got 100% of the cost, I'm not sure why you would need more than that. But maybe there's something I'm not thinking of.
If I may interject, I went to a conference recently and heard a county planner in South Dakota talk about, it's one of those cases where there was a subdivision and the developer was well-intentioned, but things didn't work out financially, for him. So the county was the one that then had to take on the responsibility of finishing the roads and infrastructure and the other infrastructure, and they found that the bond that they had the bond that they had gotten from the developer was inadequate. It didn't really cover the actual costs of finishing off the infrastructure. But that's just an example. I wanted to throw a story that I had heard, from someone in the field.
But we're not going to give building permits until the streets are paved, until everything's done, right? So I
think the one thing that we're missing on that, and please jump in, but once we entitle that property and we create block 1, lots 1 through 12, and I buy lot 10, I'm buying lot 10 with the entitlement or the feeling that I'll be able to build a home on that. Now, if I buy it as soon as it's recorded and the streets don't get put in, I can't get a building permit, and I've actually purchased an entitled lot that supposedly was guaranteed to be buildable. That's the one, I think that's the one problem by saying, we aren't going to give you a building permit. Well, that's great. Unfortunately, if I buy a lot early in a subdivision, I can't build a house until the developer builds the streets. And if he leaves...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I suppose it comes down to the practicality of a developer being able to sell lots without streets being paved. I suppose there could be situations where you do.
If we record it, he'll be able to sell it.
There were situations before we're not going to give you your CO until this is fixed, and the developer hasn't done remember a lot of these stories,
Yeah, you're
a
right.
lot of them.
But
Since I've been-
that's when we weren't on the ball. We weren't, you know, we were not prepared for what was going on. We shouldn't be getting to a CO stage.
No, because rarely, it's not the developer that's looking for the CO.
No.
It's the builder.
You're you're
And-
penalizing the builder at
That's
that
right.
point,
That's
not the,
right.
not the developer. He's already got his money.
That's right.
But from our aspect, we've got to make sure everybody's in the same boat. The purchaser, the builder, the developer, to protect the city and that we want this done. So however, whoever has to be bonded, you know, if is the point 150% excessive? It's 130% now. What's,
Well-
you know, what's the,
But we're not getting bonds now.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're not getting them. So everybody that's in the boat, they're all out there swimming around on their own, and we're just, you know, trying to catch fish. And we're not
I think-
catching anything.
And Gene, maybe you can add on to this, but when we require a bond of a contractor, it's a performance bond and a payment bond, that he's paying his suppliers and his subcontractors, and that he's going to perform, and that's really what we're bonding. So if this contractor said, boy, I have a contract with a developer to build this whatever for $1 million, and he goes into default one way or another, his bonding company has to come in and perform. They also have to pay, but they have to perform. And if they find that to perform what the contractor bid at $1 million cost them $1.1 million, I don't know that that's an issue. They have to complete the contract that was bid. And those are probably some of the sticky issues that you get into, just saying, well, we have a bond and the work's magically going to get done. This bonding company, if they have to put more into it than they thought, are going to fight tooth and nail to protect their interests, but they have to perform as well as pay. So we'll look into the percentages, I think, and get the right number, if it's 150 or if it's 130 or something else. The important thing is that there's a clear understanding, and I think it's fairly clear now, but it probably just never worked because it was in the name of, or it was pointed towards the developer to get that bond. And like Jason said, it's just probably an unconventional thing for a developer to obtain. So if we just make it clear, if it's still 130%, that the developer's contractor will have to secure that bond, maybe that just makes the developer feel a little bit better. Oh yeah, well, I'll put that burden on my contractor that we hired.
Well, we do have to decide what we want to bond for. You know, if it's for workmanship, quality of work, contractor's the way to go. But if you do want to bond to make sure a developer paves the streets, that's a different deal. And we've never worried about that because we've always said, from a practical standpoint, a developer's not going to sell his lots unless he has his infrastructure in. But that's not an impossibility. It is possible.
I think once
Lots
it's
could be
recorded,
sold.
it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
And I think the additional percentage, I mean, and we can move on, but whether it's 130, 110, 150%, if we approved a development, which we did in, say, 2012, we've got some 2012 developments that could have had a bond, and if they did have a bond, we would be cashing them in on some of those to go and build. So the cost also may go up. And I think it's also meant that the city, when they cash in that bond and Craig goes out and does a project to build infrastructure that didn't appear, that was supposed to, it's supposed to cover any additional costs that the city might incur to go build it. I think that's the rationale for having it be more than 100%, because it's not just the cost of the improvements, it's the cost to go and organize and do the improvements as well. Because there is a cost to that, and the taxpayers honestly shouldn't be paying for, say, a 2012 development for Craig's time to go make sure that's going to work. And so whether it's 20%, 10%, 50%, we pick whatever you want to pick that's reasonable. Right now, it's 130. If everybody's happy with that and we think that's good, honestly, Craig needs to be the one comfortable with it, because realistically, he would be the one handed this project and said, hey, go build this infrastructure. How much more is that going to cost, and how much of your time is it going to be? You know, when you add that to the 25 projects he already has, you know, he's got to make that work. So I think that's the other part of why it's more than 100% from my perspective.
I personally never can imagine a situation where a builder would buy a lot that isn't ready to build on.
No, but
Or that would ever be, or any person.
I think the situation would be some kind of fire sale situation, you know, where down market and somebody's trying to dump some ground.
Yeah, I suppose maybe in that situation,
But it would be something very unusual.
I mean, I just, unless they're very good business people, I just can't imagine going and say, I'll buy 10 lots, here's all my money up front, let me know when they're ready. I just can't ever see that situation ever arising.
Well, I don't think a builder would, but an unknowing consumer might, you know.
Possibly, I
individual.
suppose, maybe.
Can I
But I
interject?
agree with you.
Go ahead. Oh, surely, this is wide open.
Hey, I'm one of those people that bought a lot in Westridge. The streets were not in at the time. They sold off 3 blocks before the streets went in, but it was guaranteed in writing we were getting them, and we do have them, by the way, now, but I'm one of them, Jason.
You paid 100% of the, you paid 100% of it before it was done.
Absolutely.
This true confessions.
And I wasn't alone. The bank financed me.
So we will discuss that internally and come back, have an idea too. I mean, there again, this is another item that, you know, when we come back with the draft, I'd like to have a short dialogue on what you feel, you know, it's 130 now, I'm saying 150 is kind of a norm. If we don't want to do that, that's great. I don't have a problem with whatever we pick. I think Craig does need to be on board with that, specifically. We have some other items in the subdivision ordinance. 1,000 feet between hydrants, obviously that came from the fire people. We've had some issues with subdivisions that were approved that don't meet that requirement. And, you know, for whatever matter.
We have some hydrants spaced at 1,000 feet.
More than, yeah, no more than 1,000 feet. So we have some that are spaced greater than that. Believe me, that was their number one comment after me. I've been asking for comments for a while.
See, the health department wouldn't approve a set of plans like that. So I have to assume that,
Maybe they didn't.
you know,
or maybe
those
they,
plans just didn't
maybe they were busy too.
process and-
So we're just going to specify some things that, you know, but no more than 30 homes with one access. You know, I think we've had conversations, not only you and I, but I think fire mostly has an issue with that we're going to specifically just note in the subdivision and zoning. No more than 99 zoning units, multifamily, served by less than 2 accesses. You know, South Park, I guess, that was probably the most recent one that I know of that we've had kind of a wrestling match, and that was tied to COs and everything else, I think, too, wasn't it? So just some clarification things that, you know, that I've noticed from May to now, in talking with staff, you know, and I've asked staff a number of times, and a lot of folks have come in and said, hey, you know, what about this? What about this? How come we don't do this? These are the kind of questions and things that I'd like to kind of move forward. I don't know that anyone on this board, if you do have any concerns, questions, whatever, with these, please let me know, but I think they're just clarification things.
Do you know if, in the budget request, did the Fire department requests more hose?
More hose?
Yeah.
I can't answer that, sir. I don't know. Gene might know. He knows the budget better than I do, I'm sure. Block length not to exceed 1,300 feet, and I think we're on board with that, right? Because we don't really define it now. You're on board with 1,300 feet or less for block. I think Barron's Vista was our last discussion item that had, I don't know how long their block was, but it was longer than that. But I don't know. that
Barron's
we'll-
Vista was a half mile, it's
Yeah.
2,600 feet.
Yeah, so we may.
1,300 is plenty long.
Yeah. So if we don't, if we think that we want it shorter, that's great, but I think that's kind of the max number that we want to look at. There again, some sort of definition of what our maximum length would be.
You might want to look at some other jurisdictions, you know, a lot are 800 and 1,000. There's safety considerations there, there's drainage considerations, traffic you know, there's a lot of,
I have a note to myself here that 300 to 600 is preferred.
now you don't want,
3 is pretty short, but 600 to 800 is probably a more normal number.
1320 was that what I looked at, the blocks, golf course, 4th, 5th edition, between Fairway and Empire. Some of those have mid-block streets, but the ones that don't are quarter mile. I would add too on the subdivision ordinance, I went through it, I have dozens, maybe hundreds of comments, some of them really, really small, one word changes, a lot of it on process, things we talked about, requiring the bond, how to enter into a contract between the contractor and the city if we want to do three-way agreements. I would also say that a lot of the things that we've incorporated into our, what I'd call our template of a development agreement, you know, that just came through time and each development kind of built on the last one. And I think a lot of those things are probably vetted and we say these are good ideas and we can now incorporate those into our code. Instead of having to have these real big cumbersome, I don't want to say they're cumbersome, but if it's a standard in every development agreement, it should be a standard in our development
Yes.
code. So we'll roll those into the subdivision ordinance as well. And so the development agreement is truly unique, specific things to that development.
Right, instead, we could probably get rid of 5 conditions off the average.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, the development agreement.
Bonding being one of them. We were requiring it in a development agreement. It was in the code, so put it in the code.
one thing that I hope we can look at are boulevard widths. I'm a big believer in boulevards, but right now, with the arithmetic we have for right-of-way widths and street widths, what do we end up getting? 3.5, 4 feet or something?
4.5.
4.5. Yeah, I think if it was 6 to 8 feet. Right now, we're just inviting people to take that turf out and put concrete in with the width that it is. And I think to have room to put snow, room for trees, something that's worth bringing your mower out to, it's going to be a better deal. But to do it, we're either going to have to go to 70-foot right-of-ways or 36-foot streets. One of the two, or a combination of both, I guess.
Craig and I had visited on that a little bit, and he's got some pretty good ideas of, yes, in some of our existing places, narrowing some of the street widths. When we redevelop them, when we go in to redo those, is a good alternative to be able to provide lighting, provide signage, provide landscape, trees, urban forestry type amendments there. So, I mean, that's definitely, but, yeah, we just need to think about what the typical new right-of-way would be.
I agree with Gene as far as wider boulevards and whether or not we should narrow these streets. I think there's a good argument for keeping them wide or narrowing, because a lot of places I've been in, it seems to come about every, so often when we travel that we see places where there is more snow, narrower streets, no curb and gutter because of the type of soil they're in. They get good drainage. But the attitude of the people, it comes down. It isn't the width of the street. It's just some attitude of people, of the way they drive and the way they park. And it's hard to believe that we can't have that respect here to make it more pleasant and easier to drive and live. And we get a lot less snow and a lot less runoff than a whole lot of places, and they have narrower streets, and a lot of them do not have curb and gutter, and you don't see everybody driving all over everybody's lawns. It's like, it's an attitude. It's just comes down to an attitude of what are these people doing to be able to live like this decently with narrower streets. I don't know, some developments I saw where there's a lot of children, and maybe they decide arbitrarily or however, if there's only concentration of children of a certain age or whatever, I don't think they really do it, but they put up 15-mile-an-hour speed limit signs for several blocks all the time. It's not during the daytime or nighttime, it's 15 miles an hour. And people get along with it, so you got to drive 15 miles an hour for 5 blocks. And they do it. I really agree with Gina. The boulevard, there's no reason we couldn't have bigger boulevards.
And maybe one of the things we do to make it a little bit easier for a developer is maybe we, what we gain in the boulevard, maybe we give up in setbacks. So our lots don't have to be bigger. Or the ground doesn't have to, we don't have to take more ground.
You have anything else on that?
Nope.
The sign ordinance, I think I kind of touched on that, number 3 already, a little bit. There's just some cleanup matters that we're going to bring to you. I don't want to keep you here all day. You're never going to come back if you're...
Spent hours and hours and hours and hours in meetings and on the sign ordinance before, so I hope it's not a lot.
We never want to see a representative or an owner of a sign company
Again.
again.
Well, we're going to keep that really simple. It's going to be some cleanup things that honestly are not going to make the sign people upset either. So, ETZ. We do have a request to the county for an ETZ agreement. We haven't officially heard back from them yet. It entails us doing the land use and building inspection in that area. Not certain that that's what their response will be back, but we'll see. I think it's important that we get that finalized and moving forward. They have been working with Forsgren. Steve obviously works with them directly, and they are doing site plan review. We have had kind of a void. Everything that's been approved by this board from a land use standpoint not necessarily has been approved on the ground as far as improvements in that area because of just how it was developed out there. So, Stephen, you have something you want to
Yes, actually, it's a different issue, which is when we expanded the size of the extraterritorial area, we brought in areas in the unincorporated county where they're zoned for county zoning. It's not necessarily compatible with with our city zoning code. So it's going to be, what we want to do is work with the county and bring back some zoning code amendments so that the zoning on these properties is changed to something that's appropriate with city zoning. One of the things that I noticed is we have a number of subdivisions that I believe were originally into the county that came into the city where for some reason they're zoned to agriculture. Well, our agriculture is 5 acre minimums, and these are 1 and 2 lot subdivisions. Again, I don't know how that happened, what the process has been in the past, but this is just a formal process to, first of all, bring it to the county and say we're recognizing that these properties that were originally outside the ETZ are now inside the ETZ, and this is a recommendation of what the zoning should be changed to. and then come to the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately the City Commission to take action to change, to change the zoning. The two significant subdivisions that are now in the extraterritorial zone are Maryville on Highway 10, and then there's the Lute subdivision, which is west of town, which is primarily manufactured modular homes, that are out, in the Lute subdivision. So this is just a formal process, just a process of saying the zoning in this property, because it's under the city's zoning jurisdiction, should be this instead of the county zoning district. And I'm sure Commissioner Jackson will be hearing about this at one of the county planning and zoning board meetings in the near future.
Any questions on that? Yeah, it's kind of a twofold process. It's the agreement and it's also the zoning. So we have an existing handshake agreement, if you will, how it's being operated. Performance standards, this is where we would talk about right-of-way widths, and maybe what we'd have is some design standards and performance standards that we could give as options to people that are coming in to do development. So, Craig, unfortunately, I'm going to ask you for some nice road profiles and things that we can show that might work in specific areas for that. As you can see, all of these items have some sort of a time frame on them, and it's not cast in stone, but it's just kind of a guideline that I'm trying to look at to pick off some of these things every month, every other month, throughout the summer and all the way into the fall this year, because obviously our projections for a room full of people with development, they're not projecting that we're going to have 25 applications on every agenda. So this is a great opportunity for us to actually look at some of these things and get ready for when we have 20 applications in here and not worry about some of these items and trying to tweak them. So if you have a question or a problem with any kind of the time frame or schedule, I just kind of pulled that out of a hat and kind of went down the list and tried to look and see what we could actually reasonably do with 3 or 4 applications, let's say, on an agenda. So trying not to really keep you here forever. Under performance standards, the only other thing I was going to add was I had architectural standards with a question mark. I think that we should at least have a discussion on our architectural standards, commercial architectural standards. We have a non-conforming clause that basically if you don't exceed 50% of the existing site, that you don't need to meet our requirements. And I personally think that's a mistake. Most areas, all the areas that I've ever worked, the non-conforming status, if you enlarge that non-conformity at all, you're required to meet the current standards. That's pretty typical. I have a number of projects that are going on in town that are remodel, improvement type things that I'm trying to coax and have them volunteer to fit in with our design standards, although I couldn't really require them to. I think that, we need to have a discussion on whether or not that we think that as a community, if I can add 50% or 49% to an existing non-conforming structure that doesn't have any lighting, doesn't have any landscaping, doesn't have a paved parking lot, do we want to promote that? And my answer, I think, is no for what we envision Dickinson to be down the road. So I think we need to really talk about, and when we talk about architectural standards, I've come from some areas that had some pretty high architectural standards. They had architectural design review. I'm not insinuating that we need to do that, where everybody would have to bring in their architectural design in to this board and have it reviewed and approved. I'm not suggesting we do that. I am suggesting that from a staff level, that we would be able to encourage and get an upgrade, at least from the street frontage portion of that commercial structure to be upgraded beyond what we've gotten today. So that's kind of a big topic. Wanted to throw it out there. I don't necessarily need a direction, but I want you to think about it. If you have some comments on it, that'd be great. The other one would be lighting. Unfortunately, I missed the meeting. I'm sorry. It was all my fault. We have had some decorative light standards, and you'll start seeing them pop up. The commercial developments in town actually have embraced it. We've got Thrifty White. If you go down Villard, you can see they're the first ones to actually put them up. The lighting standards themselves, once again, previous life, if you paint a picture coming off of Interstate 94 of Dickinson of upgraded infrastructure, which I call upgraded lighting, banners, street trees, urban forestry, it all ties together. You paint a much different picture to someone coming to Dickinson for the first time than what they've gotten in the past. And I'll be honest with you, before I was very familiar with Dickinson, I really didn't know there was a downtown. Didn't really know. I was up in Watford City. I went to Dickinson once in a while and didn't really, I really didn't even know what existed down there. Some signage, some continuity, I think, is what we need to strive for throughout town. And, Craig shudders when I say that because, we thought I was wanted to have those decorative light standards everywhere in town. We don't need to have them everywhere. We have them strategically along the interstate, strategically along some of the projects that we're involved with. It will change how you perceive Dickinson. I know that Sean and I have discussed, and I think Gene is on board with looking at doing a couple demonstration projects of some of that lighting downtown. We have a really good opportunity. We've got conduits, we've got all the stuff that's there. I don't know what kind of shape it is, but it's there, that we could actually string a few of those in. Now, I know that there's different light. We have how many different kind of light standards in this town? Probably 10?
Enough.
And we're trying to narrow that down. So we'd have a decorative standard, we'd have the arterial collector standards that we need to have on the larger streets that we have that these lights can't provide. But it doesn't mean we can't incorporate them. It all ties together with the architectural standard that we want, wherever it is, adding some lighting standards in. I'd like to do a demonstration project of that up by the mall. Honestly, an urban forestry / lighting project just to kind of show people. And I've done this in the past. I'm not going to dwell on it, but we did a project in an old mining town that was turning into a ski town. It had a 250-foot wide swath of railroad right-of-way. Sounds very familiar, huh? That went right through the middle of town. It was the ugliest place on earth. I mean, it really was. No one wanted to go down there. No one even wanted to cross the tracks, and it bisected the town right down the middle, of course. It's a river valley town. The railroad pulled out in that particular area, so it was still a 250-foot wide swath of ground. We designated on the comp plan as a greenway parkway, and so we created the first 7 miles of what now is the Trail of the Coeur d'Alenes. It's a 72-mile stretch of trail that took that over. But that being said, we used decorative lighting. We took a street that went up a hill there, and we were confined with space. We didn't have the luxury of being able to say, we could never say we were going to use 70-foot right-of-ways. Our biggest was 60 because of land availability. It now, when you pull off in that town, on the interstate, there's decorative lighting. In town, sporadically, not through the entire town, but all of the uptown has it. You get a much different feel. And I think it's a feeling that you want for Dickinson, because Dickinson is that kind of a place. I don't know that we've been able to or thought about the perception of people coming to Dickinson from that perspective. I just think it's important. I do think it's important. I'd like to get your feedback on it, just because I think what you're going to see is the commercial end, they're not going to say, oh, no, we don't like that. And they like the idea that we have some sort of a direction. And the light standards that I'm talking about are the light standards that were actually picked out. I don't know who picked them out, but on the Burlington Northern overpass that we're involved with right now. They're the same light standards. So we've got a little bit of a history, not much, but a little bit of a history with those. They're available. They're decent quality. We know they're going to be readily available. And they're quite nice. I mean, it does kind of change the whole perception of the typical light. So I guess I'll leave it at that. When I say performance standards, I'd like to look at some of those too, because right now, honestly, the commercial side of anybody that's doing any work has embraced that for every single one of them I've talked to. So it's kind of like our new process. It's a change is not necessarily always easy, but change is sometimes good. And you know, I think with this opportunity, before we have 20 applications and a bunch of pushback from a developer or someone that might not want to do it, I think this is a great opportunity to say, hey, you know, let's do this. And let's be reasonable about it. I mean, and maybe let's string it out to where we have I think if you look at some of the reviews that we've done in the past number of months, a schedule of improvements. A schedule of improvement gives us, and whether it's through a development agreement or conditions, it gives us the ability to be reasonable with people from the development side and say, okay, in the first year, yeah, we realize you want to get up and running, you want to get that building done, you want to have your parking lot done. Maybe next year is the year that you finish your landscaping and you finish the lighting and you finish all of that. Putting it off a year, not necessarily is a bad thing, because you wind up with a product that you want rather than one that you're compromising for. And so does the owner. It gives them a little bit of time. And I'll give you an example. KMM wants to do an expansion, and they're one of the ones that, you know, I had 10 people sitting in my office talking about their expansion. And that's an exciting story. I mean, I didn't know their story. It's an exciting story. It's a great story for Dickinson. You know, I told them that little Sarah, instead of her coming to bother Craig or myself, should go do a story on them, you know, for Dickinson. I mean, it's a neat thing. They're expanding, you know, and they're cautious, you know, I mean, they have X number of dollars they're going to put into that development. They did not look at those additional standards because obviously they're part of town. We need to do some work on that little route. That entrance into town isn't necessarily the prettiest entrance into a community. Not that it needs to be the prettiest, but it just needs some upgrades. You know, we've got some road work that's going to be done in 17, 18, whenever it 19. And you know, it'd be nice if we coincided that and had the projects that were planned there went ahead and fit in with the rest of town at that time, now that we have the opportunity to do it. And I think they'll be excited about doing it. So I'll shut up if you have any comments on that.
You know, I'm all for the curb appeal and everything that comes with that. I suppose there's always going to be devil in the detail. We'll each have different tastes and probably not agree on how much money we should spend. But I think the concept, absolutely. Especially our gateways to our community.
Right, yeah.
That is important.
What we have is, you know, when you're dealing, no one gets to start out with a new town. You know, you don't get to start over. And I think, you know, what we're starting with is a good base. And I think all we need to do is just look at what we have and then emphasize it where we can. You know, and Craig's really good. He's already looked at some of the projects that he has for areas where we can incorporate those. Lighting, urban forestry, street trees, what have you. So I do think it's important. And you know, more than able to help push that along, and I'm pretty good at selling it to the commercial people coming in the door, for the reason, not just that, yes, it costs them a little more money, but this is where we're going.
There's a very good chance that we're going to have projects the next very few years here on both the west business loop and the east business loop. And we've got to take advantage of those projects to, you know, not only end up with a good roadway, but make them really look good. That'll be the time to do it. That's lighting or landscaping, whatever it is.
And I think Gary, Public Works, I mean, we've all kind of met on this, and I think we're kind of in agreement, aren't we, Craig? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, I think we're kind of in agreement that where we can use those, we'll be able to use them. They're not going to be able to be utilized everywhere. They're not appropriate for everywhere. Gary, I think, from Public Works wants to do, he would really like to do the core of Villard. You know, it does need some sprucing up, you know, just updating. You know, it's vintage 1968 lights and, you know, improvements for what was typical for a highway at that point in time. So it's, you know, it's, I think we're been trying to coordinate internally as much as possible so we're on the same page so it'll actually work when we bring it to you or when we talk to the public. You know, unfortunately that last commission meeting is probably a result of not necessarily everybody understanding what it was. And, you know, I've had some comments since that meeting to me, and a couple of the comments were, we agree we need lighting, blah, blah, blah. Maybe the city should do the difference if you're going to do the different kind of lights. And I'm not sold one way or another. My comment to Craig when we initially started talking about that, unfortunately I'm the one that brought it up to him, was that if we're going to do 160 lights somewhere, and if I'm telling people this is our new light standard, why would we not use them? I understand. It's a cost. That's fine. You know, but it does need to be a question that we throw out on the table, and then a decision needs to be made by the commission that for the overall good of everyone. Because, you know, I mean, if you look at those areas, I live in that area, you know, obviously I'm going to be paying X number of dollars, whether it's this much or this much, to have lighting in that area. I think it's important that it winds up being there, so doesn't really matter to me which direction it goes. I just think it's important that for the city that we take a stance and take a direction and move with that. So. Any other comments on that one, that issue? Renaissance Zone. Stephen, I'm going to let you talk about that, what we're going to be doing.
For those of you who were at the who were at the meeting, you know, last year we gave a presentation about the Renaissance Zone. The state changed the Renaissance Zone law, so now that Dickinson can add up to 13 more blocks on the Renaissance Zone, and that means actually taking action, going to bringing that to planning and zoning, and then to city commission for, you know, for approval. We've looked at the possible expansion of both directions along Villard. We plan to work with the neighborhood, you know, with the downtown association, and possibly with others who are knowledgeable of upcoming projects in that area. It would be easier if we knew about blocks where there were potential projects coming up, and then, you know, use that as a justification for expanding the Renaissance Zone. But that's the project, that's the program, the state program where they encourage new development or renovation, you know, renovation by freezing, allowing the freezing of assessments for 5 years, up to 5 years, and also the state freezes the income tax derived from the property for up to 5 years. As we discussed last year, almost entirely the projects we've seen have been commercial, and they've been projects where an existing site has been renovated. It's particularly good for if you want to update electrical systems, heating and air conditioning, plumbing, and so on, or even the more recent project over at the Esquire Club where the, you know, where the facade was updated too. So we'll be coming with a, you know, later this year with a draft of the Renaissance Zone plan update for, you know, for your consideration and recommendation.
Steve, will that include an additional possibly 13 blocks, or it doesn't have to be 13, it can be up to 13?
Yeah,
Is the
it can
continuity-
be up to 13.
Did they change anything on the regulations as far as continuity? Do they still have to be contiguous?
You can now do you can do an island, and it's up to 3 blocks. The question is whether or not, you know, there's an area in the city that would fit, you know, where it would be appropriate to do an island. And that'll be part of the research that'll be part of what we'll be doing as part of the project.
So have you started actively trying to assess what potentially, you know, businesses or areas that would maybe really benefit from this or would want it?
We've been, you know, Walter and I have been looking primarily at East and West Villard as areas that would be included in the Renaissance Zone, but it's still wide open.
What
You know,
about
there's
the old
certainly, we've identified areas where it looks like, you know, there are buildings there where we can either encourage new development or encourage renovation of existing commercial properties.
Is there a timeline as far as, say, next year you want to add 5 blocks, and the year after 6 blocks, the year after 2 blocks? Can you pick and choose as you go along, or is there a timeline when you have to make a decision?
I think we'd rather do them all at once. You know, the number of blocks is actually tied to the census. You know, their population determined during the census, and we tried to see if you know, since we've done studies that have shown the population of Dickinson has grown, the state has told us, no, you were 18,000 back in 2010, and that's the figure you have to stick to. I think the preference is to add in all 13 at this time, you know, especially to help people with development decisions.
I would hope that we could at least consider the old hospital site.
There has been some discussion, you know, of that. Not to advocate for that area in particular, but I know that Great Plains Clinic is up for sale, and apparently the practice and the building are owned by 2 different people. You know, so we have the hospital, we have what the old Sanford Clinic, I believe, is in that area where nothing's been done with that, and then we have the potential of another building, you know, within that area, you know, that could be vacant.
Might be a good island. I think we're trying to coincide some of the downtown improvement district that they're working on, the downtown folks, and have it cover somewhat the same area, so it does not only the folks that are planning to go ahead and tax themselves and have this district, that they have that opportunity for the Renaissance Zone benefits too.
Walter and I have attended, you know, the monthly meetings of the Downtown Association, and there are people who have, you know, who've purchased buildings down there, who have plans, you know, to, you know, to renovate them and to open some new. Now those are the ones that are existing and currently within the Renaissance Zone, to encourage the possibility of you know, stimulating some of the other areas adjacent to it. You know, that's where we've looked at expanding the Renaissance Zone, but we'll also consider what to do with, I understand with the hospital, you know, you've got a residential neighborhood, you know, and you had this big institution which is now sitting empty, and you know, for the sake of the neighborhood, you want to see that site redeveloped and being actively used.
And we can also, the last thing on that, we can also re-look at some of the areas that we have designated now and change that. There's a process that we have to go through to do that, and we might do that since most of all of the applications have been commercially slanted. We may look at changing some of that also. Not
Yeah.
necessarily, but we might.
It's interesting because, you know, there's a fair amount of the current Renaissance zone, which is residential, most of which is to the north of downtown, and I believe a lot of that is area that's zoned R3, and yet all the applications that I've seen that have been processed and eventually, you know, have been completed, have been on commercial properties. You know, the Renaissance zone does allow for people to update, you know, to get a break for renovating, you know, single-family commercial properties. We've just not seen that. But the process is, just to let you know, if there is a block in there, and the city proposes to remove it, it does have to be noticed, you know, go through public notice, and each of those property owners noticed also. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, nothing's happened on this block, we'll remove it and shift it over here. You know, the property owners need to be noticed that the city is looking at removing their block from the existing Renaissance zone.
Steve, does the inclusion require a public hearing?
Adding, yes, it does, and that's because the Renaissance zone plan was adopted through a public hearing. It went to Planning and Zoning Commission, and it also went to City Commission back in, I think that was 2004. So any amendment to the plan requires you know, public hearing and also adoption by City Commission.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Last two items are comprehensive plan review. Basically, you know, as we get through the zoning amendments that we've discussed, subdivision ordinance amendments and what have you, start to look at the comprehensive plan and make sure that our goals and where we're looking is still where we want to be going. And the rationale for doing that at the end of the year, most of the amendments that we're doing now, typically you look at your comprehensive plan first and then you look at the zoning. I think we have a number of issues that not necessarily are comprehensive plan direction issues that we need to clean up in the zoning code. And then this next fall and winter, we'll look at the comp plan and make sure that our directions for directional land use and what have you are where we want to be for the coming year, going down the road. Then the last one is just that annual application review. As you see, every year we're going to have an updated version of that you get. There's always going to be one available. So I mean, you know, if Gene or, you know, someone wants to come in and say, hey, where are we? Can I get a copy of that? We can give you one that's today. It may not be, you know, it may not be current today because we're not going to spend a lot of time reviewing those on a monthly basis to ensure their compliance unless we know they're out of compliance. So by the end of the year, then every year we'll recircle those and go through them. I did add one thing on my list, urban forestry update. It hasn't been decided yet, but 3 of the 4 members of the urban forestry committee have commented back to me and said that they would like to still be involved, and they don't have a problem with coming in during your meeting and acting as the urban forestry board in conjunction with you. Shirley's probably the only one that doesn't know anything about that because she wasn't here, but our urban forestry board has not necessarily met on a regular basis or been able to move forward on items. They'd like to. The committee members have said that they would like to. Craig is actually one of them. And the intent is possibly to have this board function as a base with those additional members as the urban forestry board. Now, we would have to amend some of our structure, I think, Jennifer, to do that, correct? Just for the way it is right now, I'm sure that the urban forestry board is this, and we would have to amend some things to do that. But up until now, I think the concurrence from you folks was that you were up for doing that. So just want to make sure that I can pass that along to Sean and the commission that, yes, that you guys are up for doing that. I don't think it's going to take a whole lot of time. Probably would do it at the very beginning of our meetings, so those folks could come in, be at the meeting, and then leave when when we started planning stuff, so we'd probably push our planning agenda off, to whatever, 7:30, what have you, so, might crunch our time for executive session like it did today, but I will make that work, I guess, internally. So is everybody on board with that still? You're all, okay, awesome, thank you. I'll shut up, and if you have any comments on any of those items or anything, what we will do is pick out a draft of some of the items that we've talked about that we think we can get to you for next meeting with whatever applications we have for you to look at, and we'll give them to you ahead of time. Look at them if you have any questions. It's going to be in a draft form. We're not going to have any public meeting. It's not going to be a public hearing process, but that's how this will kind of sequentially work, and then we'll just kind of work through these items as we can, pick through them. Thanks for listening the whole time.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Thank you, Mr. Josephson. Appreciate it. At this time, I'd ask if anyone has any other business they'd like to bring before the commission. If not, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
Thanks.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
A second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?